Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Demita Drayton Green, and I have the pleasure of being your host this evening for our panel of History in Our Homes. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we need to consider if we want to donate our collections and items in our homes to museums and such. But before we get into that, I want to introduce to you our session host, Michelle Evans Oliver.
Welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Michelle Evans Oliver, and I am the president of the Association for the Study of African-American Life and History here in Richmond, Virginia. If you don't know about ASALH, ASALH was founded in 1915 by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history. ASALH Richmond was founded in 2019, and we were chartered in 2020. Now, we started in the pandemic, and that's okay because we have Zoom. So we've been doing programs ever since. We're excited today to have you join us for History in Our Homes. And we are also excited and want to thank our partners, the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, as well as the Black History Museum of Virginia. And of course, we want to thank our sponsors, because if it weren't for AARP Virginia, we wouldn't be here today. So I want to welcome each and every one of you all. I hope you sit down and you have a pencil and paper ready, because we have some great information that you don't want to miss. Now, since our sponsors are here, I want to turn this over to Janaea Luck, our AARP Virginia representative. Hi, Janaea.
Hello, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you, and welcome and happy holidays to everyone. Your AARP is here to serve you. Do know that we are right downtown, located in downtown Richmond, and we are still working in our homes right now, but we are really eager to get back and start a wonderful, prosperous, healthy new year in 2022. So I will put our contact information for our virtual events, as well as scheduling a speaker. We have a downsizing and decluttering workshop that may tie into this information. So as you are working with your family members to look in that attic or that garage, know that we have a workshop that can help give you some tips, downsizing and decluttering. So I'll put that in the chat. Stay healthy, stay safe, and thanks, Michelle. Demita, I think it's back to you.
Thank you, Janaea. And welcome again to History in Our Homes. As Janaea and Michelle said, we have an exciting program for you. We're going to talk to you about saving some things in your homes. Many of us are in a position where we may want to downsize, or we may have the circumstances where we have someone else's possessions that we need to look at and go through. What do we do with all of that stuff? Why would anyone want it? Well, there are people who want these items, and there are people here to talk with you about both sides of the experience. That is, donating the items and what their experiences was like, and trying to sift through things and decide who to give it to, as well as those on the collection side who want your items and will help you to understand some of the things that they're looking for. So I will introduce the first of our four panelists. Our first presenter is Lillian Lincoln Lambert. Lillian is a successful author, speaker, and entrepreneur of a multi-million-dollar janitorial service corporation. She is a member of the Minnesota, Florida branch of the Association for the Study of African-American Life and History, and a graduate of Howard University, where she completed her Bachelor of Arts degree. Lillian completed her MBA at Harvard University, achieving a major milestone as the first African-American woman to do so. Listen as Lillian shares her experience donating papers of her very successful corporation to an academic institution. Lillian?
Thank you, Danita, and good evening, everyone. I'm happy to share this evening with you. About 3 years ago, I was approached by Julianne Richardson, who is the president and founder of the History Makers out of Chicago. She had been in conversation with Harvard University about encouraging them to get more papers donated by African Americans. Apparently, the Harvard Business School only had one African American who had donated his papers, and that was Dr. Andrew Brimmer, who was a member of the Federal Reserve Board and had also taught at the Harvard Business School. So during the conversation with the archivists at Harvard, my name came up. So I was approached and asked if I was willing to donate my papers. Well, when she asked me about that, my response was, I don't have any papers. I hadn't written anything except my memoir, so I didn't think I had anything to donate. Well, that's when I was informed that papers are more than things that you have written. It includes numerous things. And I'm sure I am not the only one who is not aware of how valuable the records of our accomplishments and the possessions that we've accumulated, how valuable those things are to other people and can assist them in any work that they may be doing. Well, my response prompted a detailed discussion with the archivist at the Harvard Business School. She gave me a list of things that they would be interested in having in their archives. And many of these things I had, but a lot of them I had destroyed because in early 2019, my husband and I downsized and I had gotten rid of a number of things related to the corporation. But as I browsed through the list, I was amazed by the number of things that I still had, even though many of them had been destroyed during the downsizing process. After previewing the list and I agreed that I would donate my papers. First, before I could proceed any further, I had to sign a deed of gift of records stating that I was donating the right titles and interests in those papers that would be designated as the Lillian Lincoln Lambert papers. Those papers would be available for use by the Baker Library, by the Harvard Business School, and made available for educational and research purposes. Now, as a business school, they were primarily interested in papers related to businesses or business entities, but there may be other organizations that want other types of items. In conversation with them, they stated that they were interested in the full experience of an individual's life from the early days to the present time. Now, in my case, they were particularly interested in my papers for their historical value, many of which covered an important time in history during the 1960s. Much of my material shared my personal experiences during that period of time. Now, those archive information can come in various sizes and comprise of a variety of materials. They can be in the form of videos, they can be papers, they can be business plans, notes. They were interested in key inflection points in the company's history. What were the key decisions made? Example, did the company decide to expand? Why did they decide to expand? When did they decide to bring new products on? What were some of the major leadership decisions? How did the leader make decisions? What influenced him to push the company forward? Documents that told of important moments in history of the company. What internal forces directed the company? As I mentioned, these can be video, floppy disks, even cassette tapes. Unfortunately, most of my corporate records have been destroyed during the downsizing process. I sold my company in 2001, and by 2019, when we decided to downsize, I didn't think I'd have any future use for documented papers. So downsizing seemed like a logical time to get rid of those documents. So what are some of those things they wanted? Well, from corporate documentation, they were interested in business plans, mission statements, board of directors meetings, any other information related to the board of directors, documents relating to the history or the corporate structure of the company. They were interested in financial information, such as annual reports, proxies, shareholder agreements, stock certificates, or any information related to shareholder information. Public relations, publicity files. These included press releases, scrapbooks. Now, fortunately, I had maintained all newspaper and magazine articles that were written about me over the years. And I'm sure we all like to read about ourselves, so it's unlikely that I would have gotten rid of those things. And I did feel that those published articles could be passed down to generations. But by giving these to Harvard, they were now properly secured and protected from wear and tear over the years. Research papers and white papers were another thing they were interested in. Unfortunately, I didn't have anything in this area. Next slide, please. Advertising, marketing, and internal publications. Advertising. I had maintained some internal newspaper and internal corporate newsletters and some company brochures, so I was able to share those. Leadership's records. While I had destroyed most of my corporate documents, I did retain many of my speeches, and some of those had been videoed. Leadership records. These involve correspondence by all key members of the company, board of directors, officers, etc. Any speech files or oral histories. Legal documents. Legal files, I did not have any legal documents. Multimedia materials. I had a number of videos, photographs, and audio files. Some I considered extremely valuable. In preparation for publication of my book, my co-author interviewed a number of people who knew me as a person. She wanted to find out what I was like as a person. These were interviews done on cassette tapes, and they include interviews by family members, friends, business associates, employees, and even some classmates. Many of the persons that were interviewed on those tapes are now deceased, including my three brothers. But now I can hear their voices on the information that has been digitized by the Harvard Business School. Otherwise, if I wanted to hear those again, where could I find equipment to play cassette tapes in today's environment? Personal files. These were files that document the full range of a person's career, including academic, public policy, any philanthropy, or other ways that you may have contributed to society. Next slide. Why are institutions interested in individuals' historical records? Well, your papers may provide additional research materials for an institution. Not only is the information available to you and to your family and students at the university, but they're available to genealogists, researchers, journalists, or anyone who may be working on material and could use some of the information that you have in your files. Next slide. Value to the donor. If your personal family records are deemed appropriate for a repository's collection and you agree to donate those, you gain to benefit from that. A repository can provide the materials with environmentally controlled and secure physical and digital storage, and they can oversee those papers, make sure they're properly handled and used properly. While you may feel that family members have little or no interest in what you have accomplished, in future years, this may prove to be a valuable resource to other generations. So how do you proceed in getting your papers to a depository? A good place to start is your alma mater, particularly if you've been involved and actively involved with the institution. If you are affiliated with any other organizations and they may have a depository, you may contact contact them and see if they are interested. The worst that can happen is they say no, but if you never ask, you will never know. And if they aren't interested in what you have, they may be able to refer you to someone who is interested in your papers. Other places you may check would be libraries and historical societies. They may be a good source. So as you think about your accomplishments and review things that you have accumulated over the years, give thought to how those things can be useful to you, your family, and the general public. Begin the process by researching where they may be retained for current and for future generations. This move could prove beneficial to you and others far beyond your expectations. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Next, we will hear from Linda Critchlow White. Linda is a native Washingtonian, retired educator, and librarian. Linda completed her undergraduate degree at West Virginia State College, a Master of Science degree at Howard University, and a Master of Library Information Science at Catholic University. She is the president of the James Dent Walker chapter of the African-American Historical and Genealogical Society Incorporated, AUGS, in Washington, D.C. She will recant her and her husband's whirlwind experience of fact-finding and decision-making in their quest to find multiple permanent homes for the myriad of papers in their possession. Linda?
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Demita, and thank you, other panelists. So getting stuff out of our attics and basements and into a proper repository. So who has seen stuff piled up like this? A lot of us have. Sometimes it's a little more organized, sometimes a little bit less, but we got stuff that we need to get out of our homes. So our experience began a few years ago. Well, let me just start this. I have donated photographs, among other things. After discovering some photos when cleaning out a relative's home, we donated them to Northeastern University. In 2006, my husband Eric and I accepted responsibility for an elder cousin, Miss Constance Glover Bruce. At the time, she was 92. Here's cousin Connie. Her mother, my great aunt, Goldie Glover Bruce, had purchased this house in 1945. Aunt Goldie died in 1977. But in 2006, we realized that neither Constance nor her mother had ever thrown anything away. So this is what the house looked like when Eric and I started taking care of or looking after cousin Connie. We did eventually have the house remodeled, but so it looks better here. So here's Aunt Goldie, here's cousin Connie. And I show you these pictures because these are ordinary folks, Eric and I, ordinary folks who just happen to come into a cache, C-A-C-H-E, of stuff that we came to realize had value. So here's some of the Bruce family photos on the wall in Manor Place in 2006. And this, to the left, we see Charles H. Bruce, who is the person we believe took the photos. Another interesting thing is that Connie, and here's Connie as a young woman, she was legally blind by the time we started looking after her. So she wasn't able to help identify certain things. But here's an article that actually appeared about the photos, because after finding photos plus voluminous amounts of letters, cards, and other documents, I consulted with Steve Farrow, proprietor of Pages from the Past, and an expert on old paper. Steve worked part-time and he had a little corner in Zawadi Gallery on U Street. And Steve said that he thought, well, I thought the old cards and letters might have some historical value, but Steve said, let's sell some of the photos at Zawadi during Black History Month. So these were professional quality photos, silver gelatin, and they were photos of families, buildings, and scenes in and around Boston. Constance was born in Boston, and Goldie had been born in Lynchburg, Virginia, but migrated with her family to Boston in 1901. So Charles Bruce had officially been a pattern maker, made parts of ships or models of parts of ships at the Charlestown Navy Yard, which of course was a pretty good job for a Black man in 1908, 1910 or so. And this is one of the houses he lived in Boston. And I learned about that house after we went to Boston to visit and to look at some of the addresses that had been documented either on the backs of some of the photos or in Connie and Charles Bruce's and other family members' papers. So at the show, some experts told us, don't sell the photos, save the photos as a collection. I'm sure some of you were already wondering about that when you heard me say, Steve said, let's sell the photos. But thus began the process of authenticating, appraising, and seeking an institution in which to place the photos. So honest to goodness, prior to this, I did not know the value of early African-American photos. And we all have things in our homes that have value, not necessarily monetary value, but certainly historical value. So here's the way the Charles Bruce Photos website looks at Northeastern University. Once you donate something, as Lillian said, you have to sign a number of different papers, and I'll show you a couple of the papers that I had to sign. But then when and if they do put materials up on the website, they indicate the dates, a creator, language of materials, and so on. And this is not a live photo, this is an image, but all 200 and some photos that we found in the house are now on the website. And you can go to the website and you can click on each image. And as you can see, it's a small image, large image, you can download them and so on. And they were just beautiful images. So here are a couple of the documents that I either had to read or sign related to the photos. I had a letter, an offer to purchase. So Northeastern actually did pay me something for the photos. They did not pay the full appraised value. So as a result, we were able to take a sizable tax donation, which is very useful as well. And then here's the agreement that we had to sign after we donated the photos. So we also donated some artifacts to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. What are artifacts? Things like clothing, curling irons, musical scores, musical instruments, and so on. Anything shaped by human craft. And the nice thing is, with the things that we donated to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, they gave us images of everything on a CD almost immediately. But, well, let me move forward. Here's a tin of Madam Walker hair glossine and pressing oil. This was among the things that I found in an apartment where my aunt had lived for over 50 years. And we were cleaning out her apartment in 2010. This is my Aunt Edna McIntyre, different from Connie and Goldie. So we found lots of memorabilia from her school days at the Madam Walker Beauty School here in Washington. And as I said, this is a tin of Madam Walker hair glossine. And there were other things in Auntie's apartment, news clippings, photographs, and the receipts for which she paid $10 a week for her lessons at the Madam Walker Beauty School. So, you know, a lot of folks keep everything. So, and then here's a picture of me standing in front of the display with the tin of hair glossine at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. By the way, I contacted the museum back around 2010 and was put in touch with a curator who came to our home and was enthralled and excited to see these materials. These are not all of the things that she picked up and took to the museum. And of course, not everything is on display at this time, but fortunately the exhibits do rotate from time to time, but we're just honored to be able to have some family objects on display at the museum. So in 2018, we donated some family papers to the Schlesinger Library at Harvard Radcliffe. So of course, Lillian talked to you about personal papers. So these are family papers. And ASALH National President, Dr. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, and then Schlesinger Archivist, Dr. Kenby Phillips, helped to facilitate this donation. So Schlesinger now has about 12 diaries that Aunt Goldie wrote in over a period of years from the 1940s up until about 1970. So there were some additional diaries. Some of them had become insect infested. So he had to discard some of them. And then here's a ledger that was there, and ledgers in general are very important, whether it's a business ledger or a personal ledger. I mean, Aunt Goldie actually kept a book ledger. Connie wrote all of her expenses for loaf of bread and milk on a piece of paper over time. So these kinds of things are important. So another thing that we donated to the Schlesinger is a scrapbook from my aunt by marriage, Martha Archer Critchlow Grant. And I just love these images. The images are much nicer in real life, but this is from like 1923. And I'm sorry, 1933, when she was at Brick College, which was essentially a junior college in Brick, North Carolina. So one of the things I decided to do was to have the materials appraised. Again, I wanted to use the donation as a tax donation. So another thing that had happened was when I met Dr. Higginbotham and she heard about one item that I had, it was actually something that related to her grandfather. She said, "What do you have?" And I sat down right then and did a list because, well, I kind of knew what I had. It is useful to have a list. And that was also useful for the appraiser that we ended up using. So when you're preparing for donating, you organize, make a list of what you have, scan the photos and or documents if you want. You don't have to because the institution will do it, but I wanted to have scans of everything that I was giving away. So I knew what I was donating. So you need to research the material. Depending upon what it is, the appraisers will tell you that if you, the donor, do some of the research, it will reduce the appraisal fee. So appraisal is not required for donations, only if you plan to sell or use as a tax donation. And then of course you want to explore various repositories. Lillian mentioned that your own institution is a good possibility. Similarly, you can investigate historical societies, museums, and libraries in your community or the community of the ancestors. So here's me talking to the appraiser, Alan Stipek. He's with Second Story Books and well-respected around the country. And he was just amazed at some of the materials. He's looking at a handbill about Tito Puentes because Connie had sent letters to her mother over the years from the time her mother was in the house in 1945. At that time, Connie was actually still living in New York until Connie moved to Washington in the 70s to help care for her mother as she was ailing. And every time she sent a letter, she included an invitation, a ticket, a handbill, a program from the church, something about what she was doing in New York where she was living. And these are boxes and bags of some of the things that we needed to have appraised. Here is the website of the materials that are at the Schlesinger at Radcliffe/Harvard. So these materials have not yet been digitized, but at least there's a wonderful list of the materials that are there. And again, it gives a brief description of them. And then if we were to click on these different links, it tells the scope and contents, description, and so on. So materials will be handled with care and properly stored if you donate them to an appropriate repository. Future availability for research is assured, and the materials are accessible to researchers and scholars. And best of all, the materials are out of your house, freeing your attics, basements, and your mind. And hopefully some of the materials will be used by researchers and scholars and included in a bibliography of manuscripts and so on at the back of a book sometime in the future. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Linda. Lillian and Linda's experiences were very similar, yet very different in the treasures that they had to offer their respective chosen institutions. So I hope from these two presentations that you've got an idea of the myriad of things that can be offered. And certainly they don't have everything, but I'm sure some of you and some of us have a bunch of other different things that can be offered to various institutions. So just think about what they said. Now, if you look in the chat or in the Q&A, I believe there was a link placed there for some suggestions, a handout from, I believe it was the Society of Archivists that may be helpful to some of you. And as we go through the next sets of presentations, if you have any questions or anything, we're going to have Q&A after the next two, after our last panelist. So please start putting your questions in the Q&A chat, the Q&A feature of the Zoom, and we will get to those as soon as we can. Our next presenters will be from the other side of the fence. They will be from the institutions that are receiving these wonderful donations that I'm sure that many of us are going to be looking to give now. So our first presenter will be Paige Newman. Paige is a curator at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. She received her undergraduate degree in classics history from Emory and Henry College and earned a Master of Science in Library Science from the Catholic University of America. Paige.
Thank you, Demita. All I want to say is, yes, listen to Linda and Lillian. And I thank you both so much for sharing your stories. I enjoyed hearing your unique experiences with the different type of records, because I hear maybe it's 50-50 between good experiences and not so good experiences. So I was just excited to hear that both of you they seem like great experiences. So on the other end, and you'll probably hear quite a bit of repetition from what I'm going to say to what you heard from Lillian and Linda, but I describe the VMHC as a personal papers repository when I talk about our manuscripts, since the bulk of our collection consists of family records, business, and organizational records. We're in the storytelling business, so when considering donations, we ask, what story do these materials tell us about Virginia, Virginia history, individual Virginians, Virginia families, businesses, or organizations? So our library collections include both printed materials such as books, journals, broadsides, and sheet music, and manuscript materials such as family and personal papers, diaries, company records, military records, and genealogies. On the museum object side, the collection consists of a broad range of materials, including paintings, textiles, silver, weapons, photograph, prints, decorative arts, furniture, and postcards. So what do we collect? We collect, for the most part, art, books, historical objects, manuscripts, business and organizational records, maps, and photographs. What we don't collect typically are items without an association to Virginia, unidentified photographs, photographic negatives, slides, film strips, postcards, national magazines, and foreign military memorabilia. Now, there are exceptions. Say postcards, you probably heard we collect postcards, and I just said we don't collect postcards. But if postcards and say audiovisual materials such as VHS tapes, cassette tapes, we even have some Betamax, go way back, reel to reel. If those are in the collection, we will accept. We're not gonna just pull those out and get rid of those, because those are connected to the bulk of the whole of the collection. So before items are accepted, we have an acquisitions committee, and we review the items. And for a couple reasons, these are, whether they fit or don't fit our guidelines. So we consider the item's historical or cultural significance to Virginia. We also look at the physical condition. Can we properly, as an institution, preserve these items, or will there be restoration needed to be preserved? And that's a There's a lot of expense that can be had if we're looking at trying to restore. And that's something we really need to consider and to be good stewards of materials. Do we already have it? And is the material already represented in our collection? Because we have some, we have people that want to donate newspapers, and for the most part, newspapers are pretty well covered by other institutions. I will use Virginia since I'm most familiar with that. Library of Virginia, they have a great digitization project called Virginia Chronicle, and they digitize newspapers from, like, I guess the 1800s on. Richmond Times-Dispatch is digitized. I'm not saying digitization is the answer to everything, but if one place is already doing it well, then I don't know why we need to, keep the originals. And plus, later, say from the 1950s and 60s up to the 80s and 90s, the paper is really fragile and it disintegrates. Another consideration is space. I mean, I know we have a pretty big building, but storage is always at a premium, especially if we are talking family papers. Will the collection grow? And will there be an expectation of future donations? So when I'm talking with donors and working with donors, frequently asked questions, and here's where some of the repeat will come up, is how much is the collection worth, or can you appraise the materials? Legally, and due to IRS regulations, the VMHC cannot appraise or assign a monetary value to the items, but we can suggest appraisers to work with. And I will consider and suggest if a donor should work with an appraiser, and if they're looking for a tax deductible reason to do that. Another question is, when will my items go on exhibit? Only a small percentage of VMHC's collections are on exhibit at any one time due to our limited space, and also long-term display can have a negative effect on preservation. That's why you don't see a lot of manuscripts or paper materials in there. We also are a research institution, and these materials can be made available to researchers, students, school groups, basically anyone interested in Virginia history. And we also use the items in a variety of virtual and in-person programs. So I almost see the disappointment in donors' eyes are like, it's not going to be on exhibit, but there are so many other opportunities to get materials out and make them accessible. Okay, back to, can I get a tax donation? Yes, donations are generally tax deductible, but you do need to consult with your tax specialist to determine eligibility in most cases. An appraisal of a donated item or materials is most likely required to receive a tax donation. So another question, if an item donated by me or my ancestors be returned to me? No. The short answer is no. If a formal document has been signed, which we call a deed of gift, the collections cannot be returned to the donor or their descendants. At the end of the donation process, donors are asked to sign a deed of gift, which legally transfers ownership of the items, as well as associated rights and interests to the VMHC. There are exceptions, say a donor we're working with, say, like Lillian, an author, or an artist, a photographer. There are certain copyrights that already may be instituted with some of their works. So we might have to separate certain papers or have certain restrictions placed on some of these items. But that's on a case-to-case basis. And usually most institutions, I know we're happy to work through that process. So there's other considerations. Large family, organization, and business collections, we encourage sampling of certain materials. For example, canceled checks, utility bills, or multiple copies of photographs. As a rule, we prefer to keep 2 or 3 copies within each collection. We don't want and do not need every canceled check or receipt or utility bill. But we may consider keeping a canceled check of the first down payment of your home, or maybe the last mortgage payment. If it's coupled with a photo of you standing in front of your home, celebrating you just moved in, or you finally just paid it off. So, or even the correspondence or letter you've written to your family, how you're excited you just found your home. Because as I've mentioned in the beginning, we're storytelling, we're in the storytelling business. So if we can make give it context and give it a story, then we'll most likely accept different types of materials. So another question and a consideration is splitting up collections. So context is important. So when collections and papers are split between different institutions, that context could be lost, and it most likely lost. And so we try to keep the papers together if possible. Now, this gets a little confusing, and Virginia is a great example of that, because we, in the scheme of things, we're not that old as a state, but there's a lot of Virginia families, and Virginia families like to spread their love and give to different institutions. So we have, say, large family collections of, I'm going to use the Smith family as the name, as well as the Library of Virginia might also have the same Smith family, but say the brother of the Smith family. So what we'll try to do, and if these collections have been, say, we're talking generations, like collecting of the Smith family started in the 1800s, and their descendants are continue to donate. We try to figure out, are we the main institution that has the bulk of the Smith family papers, or is it the Library of Virginia, or is it UVA Special Collections? Try to, as archivists and curators, do our due diligence and figuring out and talking with the family. And if we feel that, say, UVA Special Collections has more of this particular Smith brother family, then we might suggest that they donate and keep that collection as mostly intact as they can. So as I'm talking about other institutions and sort of collections and stuff, I wanted to mention the partnership that between the VMHC and the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, and Mary Lauderdale will be chatting after me. But in 2019, thanks to a generous grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, we began a long-term partnership to share collections and resources to better connect more people to the story of Virginia. So through our relationship with the Black History Museum, we're able to share our collections and also provides storage opportunities for collections, and also share our papers and objects to use for research programs and exhibitions. And I bring this up, one, because we like to share our story about the partnership, but also as an opportunity when considering donating papers that maybe institutions are working together can also benefit from your donations. So I'd rather leave more time for Q&A. So I'm going to stop right there and hand it back over to Demita.
Thank you so much, Paige. And I appreciate how you were speaking about telling a story, storytelling, and these items that are being contributed should be able to tell a story. As a historian who's got her start in genealogy, I can tell you that when I go to institutions such as yours and the African-American Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia, and I'm looking at things, it gives me such pleasure to see and know that you guys are taking care of these items, and that persons like Lillian and Linda have donated these items, because it makes our job so much easier to be able to have items that help us tell the story, whether pictorially or textually. It's a huge, huge benefit to us. So now I would like to move over and introduce us to Mary Lauderdale. Mary Lauderdale moved to Richmond, Virginia from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1995. She first learned about the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia after viewing a spot on the 12 o'clock news. The museum was looking for new volunteers, and she was hooked. 2 years later, she was offered a temporary position, and it now has been a 23-year labor of love. Mary has served as frontline staff, chief docent, visitor, and volunteer services, gift shop manager, and operations manager. Mary is a founding member of Sisters of the Yam, an African-American quilters guild, which has been meeting at the museum since the guild's formation in 2001. Mary says that Virginia's Black history is America's history and offers a wider view of history and culture to learn and interpret. I love interacting with our patrons. Mary feels that leading interpretive tours with interactive exhibitions, high tech with high touch, serve to enhance the museum experience. Mary? Mary, please mute.
You mean unmute? Yes. Okay, I'm gonna dive right into this. Okay, so why do museums collect family artifacts? So the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia's mission, in a nutshell, is to explore stories that inspire. We tell the untold stories, the undertold stories, folks that you know about, folks that you don't know about, and explore more. And so to fulfill this mission, we collect and preserve newspapers, ledgers, photographs, documents, 3D artifacts, oral histories, maps, books, and more. The Black History Museum collects these items for a variety of reasons. Items may be collected for their artistic value or the cultural influence, or for education and the enjoyment of the public too. Artifacts have their own stories to tell, and further research may uncover additional facts or relationships about the object or the story it represents. And as a cultural center, the Black History Museum collects, preserves, studies, and presents to the public objects of material and spiritual culture that reflect the development of our community. So we all collect things. And there are lots of different kinds of collections and different reasons behind this, and that includes museums. Now, you might collect because if it's a hobby or you like collectibles that you feel is fun or you enjoy it, or you might collect it for monetary value. Perhaps you've collected with the idea of investing in an item in the hopes that they will appreciate in monetary value over time. You know, people have Beanie Babies, they have comic books, they have music albums and the like. And the one thing I would say to that would be, if you're collecting something, please like it, because it might not appreciate in value, and it's something that you're going to have to live with. So I think most people do collect for the fun of it. Antique collecting. This is a type of historical collecting, but is usually done for fun and aesthetic value than for historic preservation. Sometimes collectors are investing for potential monetary gain, and other times just because old things are just cool. Historical collecting. This type of collecting is a hybrid of hobby, collectibles, and antique collecting, and it involves collecting items of historical significance. Like the Black History Museum has a KKK robe, and our motivations for collecting varies. So, family heirlooms. Collecting items that were owned by ancestors is very different from any other type of collecting. There is often a deep sentimental value attached to items that have been passed down from one generation to the next. Sometimes the monetary value of these items is involved, but is rarely the real reason why people collect family things. There's usually some type of emotional connection to it, because we've all seen like the Antiques Roadshow, and somebody might say, oh, it's worth this. And they're like, I'm still not going to part with it because this is part of my family. So why do museums collect? And some of this, I'm gonna differ a little bit from Paige because of African Americans' history. Why do museums collect? There are many reasons behind individual collections, and that's the same with museums. History museums generally fall into the category of historic preservation collecting. They collect items that tell stories, both from famous people and from everyday people. Generally speaking, the monetary value of historical items isn't as important to history museums as it might be to an individual collector or another type of museum. So I say that, I'll explain a little bit more later. How do museums decide what to collect? When a museum accepts a donation or acquires a new artifact, it is making a very serious commitment. The museum's field has very strict rules as well as ethical and legal guidelines that dictate what we can and cannot do with an object. Each artifact in museum collections must be properly stored and cared for, which takes space, time, and money. So museums have to be very selective about what they accept into their collections. We can't save all the old things. So we do have some basic criteria that we use when deciding which donations to accept. So first, the items have to relate to the mission of the organization. The Black History Museum's stories are, and we tell our stories. Every artifact, or just about every artifact we accept, we wanted to tell a story, an African-American story. Was it made in Virginia? Was it used by someone in Virginia? We look to the item's provenance, and that literally means source or place of origin, to determine if we should collect it. For museums, provenance not only gives the significant story about the artifact, it is also a record of ownership that is used as a guide to authenticate the story, and whether the donor can give it to you, they have the legal rights to the item. Even if an object isn't in great condition, the Black History Museum might decide to accept it as it has a very compelling story to go along with it. Then the museum has to determine if the artifact itself has historical value. Sometimes museums don't necessarily need a good story to go along with the artifact if the object itself has value. For example, like you have a racist object, it might have a direct history that goes with it, but the artifact represents an important time and events in Virginia's history. Third, Black History Museum needs to assess whether an artifact provides informational value. So an example would be a copy of the Green Book. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Green Book, but it was a publication that was founded to service Blacks that were traveling. It was a travel guide. And it was a way Blacks could find places that would service them gasoline, place to eat, sleep when they were going into certain areas. Now, the person that started this publication was from New York, but it advertised places in Virginia that would service Blacks in a segregated time. So it'd be something that we would want to collect. Another example would be like the Pittsburgh Courier, or even the Washington, D.C. edition of the Afro-American. These newspapers served as a kind of AP wire for Blacks, and it would contain informational things such as, they'd have sections in it such as the Richmond Roundup. Why is that in the Pittsburgh Courier? Or Spotlight on Portsmouth. And that's because even though folks, when they started to migrate north, they were still interested in news from their native Black communities that would not otherwise be mentioned in the mainstream newspapers. So we might collect these newspapers, maybe not a Richmond Times-Dispatch, but one of these types of newspapers. Maybe the information is valuable, maybe not, but it is news and it's still interesting. One thing I want to tell you guys about is about 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago this year, the Black History Museum was celebrating its 30th anniversary. And so we opened up an exhibition that was titled Pearls of Wisdom, Black Families and the Nobility of Everyday Living. And that was in honor of our 30th year anniversary. I guess pearls are like when you're married, 30th anniversary, I believe, is pearls. And it contained examples of saying traditional wisdoms that were passed down from African-American families in Virginia, as well as the new voices of wisdom from the youth. And that included kids from like the local Boys and Girls Club, Youth of Today. We utilized family heirlooms and on loan and some of our own collection to make up this exhibition. It was a very beautiful exhibition. The last thing I just want to say is when looking to donate to an institution, it is a good idea to have a conversation with the museum to determine criteria of the institution you are donating to, so that the potential donation will go to the right source. Just as Paige was talking about, the best place for preservation of the stories that you might want to tell, save it for years. And your family memories are precious. Two other things I just wanted to say. I wanted to talk a little bit about another, for instance, is saving these artifacts. We had one donation several years ago that it was a diploma. And the reason why the lady donated to us is because it was framed, it was an antique, it was her father's, and some kids in her family knocked it over and broke the frame. And she said, that's it, I'm getting it out of the house. So she donated it to the Black History Museum. Well, we actually used it in our display for the 50th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. And when the woman came in and saw it on display, she started crying. And she said, you don't understand what this means to me. She said, right after I donated this piece, at a major fire. And if she had not gotten that out of her house, it would have been destroyed. So it was very, she knew it was protected, it was in a new place. And that's just, that was just, one interesting thing I wanted to talk about. And the other is quilts. Sometimes folks come and they want to know how to preserve antique quilts, or people are fighting over it. I have instances in my own family where an old quilt's probably not worth saving the whole thing, but maybe it can be cut into blocks and then framed, and people can share it within the family or share it with the museum later and give some history about that quilter in their family. So that's all I want to say, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. So one of the key points that I'd like to point out, particularly as I was watching Linda's presentation, is the voluminous amount of pictures that she had. And I wanted to ask Linda a question, if I may. One of the things that we would like to emphasize here is that whenever we have pictures, we have to label them and date those family photographs. Linda, I wanted to ask you, how many of those photographs were identifiable, and what was the experience like going through trying to identify them, label them? Were they labeled? Can you give us an idea? Would you unmute, please? Linda, would you unmute, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Demita. So only a few of those 200 plus photos had been labeled. The best part was that some of the photos had a stamp on the back of them that said taken by Charles Bruce or Charles H. Bruce. And they even had a couple of different addresses. And then at least one photo had the name of another photographer. It said Bruce and Fisher. That's a whole nother story. But most of them were not labeled. So what happened was, after I talked to some different people here in DC, we were led to someone in Boston, and then led to someone else in Boston. And then I communicated with some relatives, some of whom were definitely relatives, but they were not people I knew growing up. I met them because there were letters in Goldie and Connie's house that those people had sent to Connie. And so I wrote them, and we ended up, meeting, talking, visiting, and so on. And they helped me identify some people. But most of the people were not relatives anyway. We learned that Charles Bruce had kind of an avocation of going around the community taking pictures. But the other thing I'd like to share, if I just want to, can you lower that screen for a minute real quick? Maybe you can see this. This is the book that my mother and I did a few years ago back there then. And one of the reasons we did this book is because, aside from the Charles Bruce photos, other parts of my family, my mother and others, took a lot of pictures, and they kept a lot of pictures. And so throughout this book, there are pictures, documents, images of documents, diplomas, letters, and so on, so that we could have a way for other family members and even others who'd like to take a look at this book to know some of what we have, because I knew I couldn't hold on to all of it. I knew we couldn't keep all of it in my mother's house. In fact, people keep talking about decluttering. My daughter and I used to joke, Grandma, meaning my mother, Grandma thinks I'm gonna take all this stuff to my house when she's gone, right? And so, and by the way, Lillian and I met as a result of, well, we met through Michelle, who helped us tell our story on the TV show Legacy List. It was all about downsizing and such, because we had a lot of stuff. And it's just, there are lots of different ways of telling the story and getting the story told. Did I answer your question about identifying photos? The point I was trying to make, that my mother did identify a lot of pictures. People are amazed when they look at some of her photo albums, and she has all these notes, and they say, who did this? You know, they think I did it because it's in my hands now because I'm a trained librarian. No, my mother labeled 90% of the pictures that she took from the 1930s going forward.
Thank you very much, Linda. Lillian, I wanted to ask you, how difficult was it to decide which of your papers to donate and which of those to keep? And did you in fact keep any for your own library or preservation?
Most of the papers related to my business, of course, that I had retained, I gave to the university. I didn't have a great need for those. And many of them related to my experiences at the business school. For instance, I have copies of some of like my application to admit there, my loan, when I finally paid off my loan for graduate school, those types of things. I sent those, but I have copies. But I will be able to get many of those things in a form of, they've all been digitized. I can access to them. So it wasn't difficult to decide what to give, particularly since I was far along in the downsizing process. I'm not, my husband was much worse at wanting to hold on to things than I was. I was willing to give up lots of things. There are a couple of things that I kept. I still have my grandmother's organ. It's stored in his family's home. I didn't want to get rid of that. I wasn't ready to get rid of it. I don't know if the family member wants it. And another thing that I kept, and well, I didn't give, this didn't go to Harvard, but it's something that I have in my possession. My mother graduated from Virginia Normal Institute, which is now Virginia State, in 1922. So I have a photograph of her class picture. I think there were 5 people in her class, the professor and things. And that just has personal value to me, because the fact that she went to college in 1922, the oldest of, only one of her siblings to go to college. So things like that I kept. I have a few things that I kept that's treasured.
Thank you, Lillian. And so I think what you're answering just shows that there are some things that we want to keep. And even though an institution may or may not want it, we also have some decisions to make about keeping our own items for our own purposes, or even just to maybe just discard. But there is a decision that needs to be made, what to give, what to keep ourselves, and what to, find about, to look at as far as dispersing in another manner. So I just wanted to run through the chat. I do notice that we do have a person or two that has dialed in. So I would like to make sure that I just run through the things that we answered already, and just some pointers for that individual who can't read the chat. There is a posting for those of you who may not have noticed. There is a link from the Society of American Archivists about donating personal or family records. So that is in the chat. And also the individuals that may be on the phone, there will be our email addresses listed at the end of this presentation, and will be verbally read. And also, you may be able to contact some of the sponsors here or the organizations that is giving us the space to do this, and they may be able to present that link to you. Some of the comments that we have. Thank you, Linda and Lillian. This has been so informative. Thank you for this information. Some of the questions that were asked in the chat that have already been answered. When you make a donation, how can you ensure that your family will have access to documents in the future? And are there typically contracts or agreements in place? And I believe that page covered that very well. What's a safe way to protect a 100-year-old photograph? I believe that was answered also. And the question about the handout. So there's a question here from Diana Brawley, wondering if you have information about how to preserve or care for beadwork from 1835. How to preserve or care for beadwork from 1835.
That's tricky. And since I'm so manuscript focused, textiles and beading, I would have to, I'm gonna actually, well, my email's on the screen. That would be something I would need to look into myself. Virginia-based, I would probably call the Valentine, contact them, because they do have quite a bit of textile and clothing. That would be my first suggestion, but I'd have to do a little research on my own too. Or Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. That would be another place to contact.
And for people who are in the DC area, you can contact the Textile Museum, or even there is a textile specialist at the National Museum of American History. There might also be one at the Museum of African American History, but there are conservators who can answer these questions. One of the interesting things is we just kind of gave an overview tonight. There's so many factors to be considered in donating. As Paige pointed out, papers, manuscripts are different from textiles, and that's different from wood things, furniture and so on. So maybe one of these days somebody will put together maybe a half-day program where we have all these different people, including archivists and accountants and others who can give some of the advice on how to go about it. And I want to point this out too. One of the things Lillian and I have in common is that we realized that we couldn't keep everything. They say sometimes the best gift you can do to your kids is to clean up yourself instead of expecting your kids to do it. We're not going to be here forever. But in organizing all this stuff that I had to organize from these other relatives, and to be honest, I still have some more stuff to do, but sometimes we need help. And there are organizations, individuals who can help. There are professional organizers. We should have talked about that. That's a whole nother topic, because a lot of times people don't downsize because it's overwhelming and they think they can't handle it. My own mother was sort of like that, so a lot of times people don't want to move from their homes. Well, what will I do with my stuff? So there are people available who can help. Sometimes, usually it is for a fee, and you can ask your friends. But as one of my professional organizer friends told me, when you have a professional organizer help you, they're telling you what to do. But when you have your friend help you, you're usually hoping to tell them what to do, but you might not really know exactly how to go about organizing the things either.
Thank you, Linda and Paige. And as a tie-in, Linda, to your comment about organizations, Benjamin Ross made a comment. There are many organizations, for example, churches, that have a lot of items, papers, artifacts, etc. They need help and instruction on how to preserve their items. Mm-hmm. And that is very much true. And it's important very much that they preserve those items, particularly for our African-American institutions, because those are the organizations that we need to preserve the history and our history for. And sometimes, it may be a challenge trying to find the right organization that those papers can go to, But I would imagine that the first thing Paige, Mary, Linda, Lillian can probably tell you is that they have to be in a condition that is worth even examining and looking at, so that they don't fall apart. I say that because as a historian going to various archives and collection organizations, sometimes we look at papers and they're crumbling in your hands, and it's like, oh my goodness, I want to look at this and I want to examine it and I want to read it, but I'm scared to touch it. And sometimes those museums and archives won't even let us touch it because of the delicate nature of it. So yes, please, these organizations need help. And does anyone have any suggestions other than Linda's excellent suggestion about people who are in the profession of helping us do that, for those organizations that might need some help but might not necessarily have the funds? Is there a way that these organizations can be helped? Does Paige or Mary, do your organizations, your institutions have any suggestions for such organizations?
Besides just being available to answer questions and maybe even show ways, low-cost ways to preserve the materials, that's about all, like, right now our institution can offer. Besides searching out, which is time consuming, searching out money, grants, or something like that would help fund preservation project is another option. But there's archival materials are expensive, and I did add a link. There are many places we get our supplies, and you just climb down a rabbit hole when you start getting into that. But there we could actually start doing workshops that just a low cost way. What I usually say, if you're comfortable, then your papers are comfortable, even though papers shouldn't, there's specific temperature and humidity they need to be kept in, but get them out of your attics, get them out of your basements, put them, either on the first or second floor, keep them at least comfortable in that way. But yeah, maybe it's more searching for and having low cost workshops and options for churches, especially because there's a lot of churches out there and those types of organizations that have great records that need to be preserved and made accessible if available.
Okay, thank you, Paige. We also had a comment with in response to the question about beadwork. Carolyn Kipps makes a comment. Colonial Williamsburg also has a collection through 1850 that can give advice on beadwork, embroidery work, etc. Ms. Beseda Cawthorn White suggests that the individual contact Meg Hughes, who is the Director of Collections and Chief Curator at the Valentine. Okay. Let's see, what other questions were that we can share here? There was a question from Bridget Jones Kennedy. Are there organizations that can help you scan photos? I know that there are, you can take those items for pay, of course, to copy places like Kinko's and Office Depots. They have those high-speed scanners that, they will charge you per image in order to scan those. But Paige, Mary, Lillian, Linda, would any of you know of any organizations that can help with that?
No.
Yeah, I put one in the chat. It's called Preserving Your Heritage, and they will scan and organize your photos. I actually met them at a national genealogy conference, and you do have to pay for them. However, if you're in an area where there is a family history center, one of the ones run by the Church of Latter-day Saints, they have scanners that you can use for free. Now, again, it's do it yourself. Oh, here in DC, at the DC Public Library, I forget what they call it, digital lab, something like that. You can go there, memory lab, my husband just told me. You can scan them there. But again, to Bridget and everybody else, one of the things we never get one of the reasons we never get this stuff done is because we think we're going to do it ourselves. So yes, there are people who will do that. And I have another name or two. In fact, there's a whole business of photo organizers. If you go to the website of the Organization of Professional Organizers, then there are people whose specialty is organizing photos.
Thank you, Linda. And so for those persons that are so very interested in organizing and scanning, we hope certainly that you're also considering doing that and getting yourself organized so that you can speak to one of our institutions represented here or in your area, or as Lillian suggested, perhaps your alma mater. There's just so many institutions that would welcome your items. But the important thing in the first step that you have to do is make the contact, make the decision, number one, that this is something that you want to do, get organized and reach out to those institutions and see who would be the best fit for the items that you have. So I wanted to ask Lillian and Lillian, I know that you said that you were I'm sorry, your alma mater came to you and asked
Yes.
you for your donations, that they had an interest in your papers. Had you given any consideration to making any donations or what to do with your papers prior to that?
No, as I said, I wasn't even aware that, quote, papers had any value, or didn't even understand what papers were. I'm not, I haven't been that involved in history and over the years, so I just assumed that what I had was of value only to me. And once I sold my company, I started getting rid of, after about 15 years, I started getting rid of documents. I didn't have any of my incorporation papers or board of directors minutes and those type of things. I didn't think there was a need for them. I had no idea these were things of value to institutions. So then I had to spend a lot of time digging through what I did have left to see what I could put together to send to the school that would still have some history of continuity. So, but I was able to find a number of things that they were interested in. I'm still in the process of, I'm still going back to now many of my speeches. You know, when you do a speech, you do an outline, or you may not write everything. So I'm going back over, but they want copies of those. So I'm in the process of working on those now.
Thank you. Mary, working with an African-American institution that preserves our history and culture, you already mentioned one particular incident where an individual was so very happy that they donated the item. Otherwise, it would have been lost in a fire that happened later. Can you speak to some of the reactions that you get from some of the items that are donated to show the importance and the significance of it to your visitors?
I'll tell you that photographs, but even everyday objects, just you'd be surprised at some of the things that people, it just is near to dear to their heart. An item such as a super soaker, a modern day invention, but had no idea it was an African-American invention. Versus talking about someone like Sarah Boone, who had a patent on an ironing board, on the shape of an ironing board. So I'm trying to think some of the really aha kind of things with folks. There's just so many. Even the fact that we have a lunch counter from the 60s, Woolworth's lunch counters, the relating to the children, things like sashes. You know, they see Maggie Walker have these elegant sashes that they would put around if they were part of the order that she belonged to. And to relate that to today, you know, they get merit badges, they have certain t-shirts they wear for certain type of camp that they belong to. Those are the kind of things, you know, they can start to relate the past to the present.
Thank you very much, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And in telling the stories that we have within our African-American history and culture, as a historian, I can tell you that having visual items to place in context and in concert with the written story that we are telling helps bring that story alive. I often think about the values of some of the things that we see in archives, like when we go in, we see movies from older times that represent maybe the 20s, the 30s, the 1890s. It makes it so much more personable, and it draws us as viewers into the history of that movie because the whole scene is set up from that time frame. Think about it when we're no longer here and people are wondering what life was like in 2021, 2020 during COVID. Those pictures, those images, those stories that we have now, those will be able to help people in the future understand, see, and perhaps feel what we were going through during these times. So it's these types of things that the importance of making donations can help, not just now, but also with our history and storytelling in the future.
Yes, I do remember one particular story I wanted to talk about was just a collection of racist, I mentioned it earlier, mammy type figurines, things that people had in their homes. And there's one story of a man who was standing behind a woman in a shop. She bought one, a Black woman bought one of these pieces. And as soon as she bought it, she smashed it to pieces right on the counter from the shop owner, right in front of him, and then walked out. Now, I understand how she feels, but as a historian, now that's a piece of history that's gone. As horrible as it is, it's gone. So, and today, even with the Black Lives Matter movement, some of the things that we've recently collected include some of the items that were used in 2020 that will be very relevant 10 years from now, 20 years from now, harkens back to maybe the 70s and the 80s and Vietnam War protests. So it's a continuum, and it helps us all to relate to this history. And we say African-American history, but it's Americans of African descent history.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you to all of our panel members and all of our guests and everyone. I believe we've addressed all of the questions that are in the chat. And I just want to thank you all so very much for your attention, for your dedication, and for your sharing. I would like to turn it back over now to Michelle Evans Oliver. Thank you all.
What a wonderful presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, all of you, for just sitting down on a Monday. I mean, this is a Monday, and we're learning here on Monday. So, and I just had dinner, and I know that I am so happy that you all have come to join us to talk about history, coming together and just learning how we can donate, and we can look at the things that are around our home to donate to museums and libraries. This is such an excellent, excellent topic. Hopefully we can do this more often. I want to give a super, super shout out to the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society of Richmond, Virginia. They're our new partners for ASALH, and stay tuned next year for some genealogy partnerships and information that we will start probably in maybe January, February, so stay tuned. If you want to know more about what we do at ASALH RVA, follow us at ASALH at RVA on Facebook. And that's where you will see all of our updated information, what we do, all of our webinars, and maybe one day we will be able to show our faces and see each other and do this face to face. Thank you, Lillian Lincoln Lambert, Linda Critchlow White, the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. I appreciate, and we appreciate you having us here. Paige Newman, archivist, wonderful. Mary Lauderdale, thank you, Black History Museum of Virginia. And thank you, of course, from our sponsors, AARP Virginia. There's one thing that I wanted to say. We have another program. I know we've been doing programs all throughout this year, And we have one more, and I'm going to share that with you all if I can. It is next December the 28th. And on December the 28th, we are doing a Black Health, Wealth, and Resolution. And that is, if you go to our website, I'm not going to pull it up because I know you're ready to go. But if you go to our our Facebook page, you'll be able to see that. We have Dr. Mills, who will talk about plant-based health and how to get healthy in the new year. So without further ado, I'm going to let you all go to bed with all of this on your mind. And if you have any more questions, please reach out to either one of our panelists. Here is the information here for you, and have a great evening. Janaea, are you there? And do you want to say anything?
I am still here, but no, great job, everyone. Great job, ladies. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay tuned for more information. And at the end of this year, December 28th, 2021 and 2022. Bye-bye.